At the very least, Negroes could support Negro businesses. Now, there were circumstances that were out of the control of Negroes in 1930s and 40s Chicago, but spending money with black businesses wasn't one of them. So we're going to hear about some of the struggles that Negro business owners faced during that time, which include the difficulty of systemic handicaps created by whites, and also the lack of business support by blacks. We're studying from the 1945 book Black Metropolis by St. Clair Drake and Horace Caton. Service.
The business exposition at the Armory was one of the finest achievements of our people in the history of Chicago.
This was an organized event in Chicago where Negro-owned businesses showcased their goods, their services, and economic potential to the black community.
Are there any members of the exposition committee here? If so, please stand.
A man stands.
Come right down here where you belong. We've got a seat right here in front for you. This man is manager of the Apex Shoe Store, the shoes that I wear. We can get anything we want to wear or eat from Negroes today. If you would do that, it would not only purchase the necessities of life for you, but would open positions for your young folks. You can strut as much as you want to and look like Miss Lizzie,
an upper-class white person.
But you don't know race respect if you don't buy from Negroes.
This person speaking was a pastor of one of the largest churches in Bronzeville, a black neighborhood in South Chicago. He's speaking to his congregation and trying to do the daring task of convincing Negroes to spend their money primarily with Negro businesses. Because in his view, not doing so showed a lack of respect for the Negro race.
As soon as these white folks get rich on the South Side, they go and live on the Gold Coast. And the only way you can get in is by washing their cuspidors,
which was this bowl that they used to spit tobacco. So he's saying that Negroes could not get in the Gold Coast as an equal, only as a servant.
Why not go to Jackson's store, even if you don't want to buy nothing but a ginger snap? Do that and encourage those girls working in there. Go in there and come out eating. Why don't you do that? Tomorrow, I want all of you people to go to these stores. Have your shoes repaired at a Negro shop. Buy your groceries from a Negro grocer. And for God's sake, buy your meats, pork chops, and yes, even your chitterlings from a Negro butcher.
That's at the very least. Don't skip the man and go to the Jews or the whites. Keep the money in the community is what he's proclaiming.
On behalf of the Negro ministers of Chicago, I wish to commend these Negro businessmen for promoting such an affair and urge upon you again to patronize your own, for that is the only way we as a race will ever get anywhere.
At least in the economic sense in terms of community. And this seems to be fairly straightforward and easy to do. But Negroes, for many reasons, in general, weren't that successful with doing it. Occasionally, yes. But in general, not so much, which is why the pastor had to give this talk way back in the 1930s. Residents of the Negro community rather generally approve of those churches and ministers who lend their support to Negro enterprises, and church members sometimes cite such actions as evidence that their pastors are progressive. As one woman phrased it,
Reverend Moss is one of the progressive ministers. He tells us that we are too dependent on other races for employment and that we must establish good, sound business enterprises and at least give employment to the many youths that finish their education each year. His one principal subject is cooperation and racial solidarity, for in union there is strength.
Unity is especially important for people who have been dealt the lower hand in life. They can't afford to go it alone. They have to move deliberately as a team. Think about an ant. On its own, it's fragile and insignificant. But in massive numbers, ants become powerful. And some species of ants can take down animals much larger than themselves. Think about that. Preachers who do not preach the gospel of the double duty dollar are liable to such caustic criticisms as this.
God have mercy on our preachers. They are the supposed to be leaders of the race, but all they are interested in is money for themselves.
Many likely were. But some, like the preacher we just heard, who tried to promote growth in the community, couldn't have been out just for themselves.
We pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for churches, but when it comes to building Negro businesses, it seems that our people are not interested.
That was his observation. Now, most certainly there were blacks who really did support Negro business, but not enough and not at the level that could truly unlock the group's economic potential. Because there must have been a lot of money passing into the hands of other communities that could have stayed in the Negro community. And that's likely why he expressed this concern so strongly. This endorsement of business by the church simply dramatizes and brings the force of sacred sanctions to bear upon slogans that the press, the civic organizations, and even the social clubs repeat incessantly, emphasizing the duty of Negroes to trade with Negroes and promising ultimate racial salvation if they will support racial business enterprises. The efficacy of these appeals is difficult to measure. There is no way of knowing, for instance, how many of the hearers react like the person referred to in this probably apocryphal story told by a colored merchant.
A Negro came in here with $5 worth of Jew stuff in his arms and bought 10 cents worth of salt pork from me.
So a $5 purchase from the Jew and a 10-cent purchase from the Negro. Now pay attention to why he believed this was the case.
He said, every Sunday morning the Reverend wants all who bought groceries from a colored grocer to raise their hands. Now I can hold mine up with a clear conscience.
So his purchase didn't come from a place of wanting to build up the community, but rather to check the box and say that he supported a colored grocer. That's why he spent $5 with the Jew and only 10 cents with the Negro. Stuff is wild, I'm telling you. To the Negro community, a business is more than a mere enterprise to make profit for the owner. From the standpoints of both the customer and the owner, it becomes a symbol of racial progress, for better or for worse.
There's been a great deal of propaganda created against the white merchants in this neighborhood. Some of it coming from the ministers in the pulpits of their churches, advising the people to patronize Negro merchants whenever possible. And they are doing it.
So you see people preaching the doctrine of Negro economic solidarity, and people were supporting, but it just wasn't enough of them. Now you can imagine if blacks had the cultural cohesion of the Japanese, Chinese, when it came to economics, then that community would have elevated to an entirely different level. The elevation of the double duty dollar slogan into the realm of almost sacred dogma results primarily from the fact that Negroes participate in two worlds, the larger community of city, state, and nation, and the smaller, socially isolated, and spatially separate Negro world. As participants in the general American culture, they are exposed to a system that places a high premium upon business success and white-collar occupations. Financial power and economic control bring those political and social rewards which have traditionally been supposed to serve as incentives to thrift, enterprise, and hard work. Negroes, using the same school textbooks as whites, reading the same papers, attending the same movies, and in constant contact with the white world, tend to incorporate the general ideals of American life, which included individual success and material prosperity. Ideals incorporated into the garden of the Negro's mind. Inevitably, they measure progress since slavery partly in terms of the positions of power and prestige which Negroes attain in the business world, which is what American culture values most. Status is tied to wealth, or largely tied to wealth, not character and culture. So the more money a person makes, the more respect they command. That's the mindset that many Negroes absorbed too. Because again, people aren't born with these ideas. They learn them while traveling through life. Objective reality, however, is at variance with the ideal. Why? No Negro sits on a board of directors in LaSalle Street. None trades in the grain pit or has a seat on the stock exchange. None owns a skyscraper. Negro girls are seldom seen in the offices and stores of the Loop except as maids. Colored traveling salesmen, buyers, and jobbers are a rarity. The largest retail stores and half of the smaller business enterprises in Bronzeville are owned and operated by white persons, and until recently many of these did not voluntarily employ Negroes. So the disconnect here was that Negroes took on the mainstream American belief that wealth equals status. But they were still systemically denied the opportunity to achieve that wealth. So even while chasing the ideal, the system kept them locked out. The Great Migration created the Negro market. This refers to a Negro market outside the South because a Negro market already existed there. But tens of thousands of Negroes flooding into Chicago gave birth to the Negro market there. Both white and Negro merchants, as well as the Negro consumer, became increasingly conscious of the purchasing power of several 100,000 people solidly massed in one compact community. They saw the potential for more cash money on the head of each Negro. The rapid growth of the Negro community between 1915 and 1929 was accompanied by expansion in all types of Negro-owned businesses, not the least lucrative of which was speculation in real estate. 2 colored banks and 3 or 4 insurance companies began to amass capital from within the Negro community and to lend money for the purchase of homes. Impressive. Their own bank and lending institution, very impressive. The Depression of 1929 liquidated the 2 colored banks and wiped out many of the larger enterprises. They went down to the grave. They died to death during the Great Depression. Paradoxically, however, it stimulated an increase in the number of smaller businesses, as many people with some savings saw in the opening of a small store one means of ensuring themselves against starvation. The impact of the Depression, combined with the fierce competition for good locations, for credit and capital, also resulted in an accentuation of racial antagonisms, including anti-Semitic manifestations. The Depression also revivified the dream of organizing the purchasing power of the Negro, not only for the salvation of Negro businessmen threatened with extinction, but also as a possible method of creating jobs for the thousands of persons who were going on relief, and for the impecunious and unemployed white-collar class. Attempts to organize the economic power of the Negro have followed 2 main lines. 1. Forcing white merchants to employ Negroes through the use of the boycott, which Negroes became really good at. And 2. Urging Negroes to trade with Negroes. This one needed a bit more improvement. The latter has, of course, been the preferred objective of Negro businessmen. That Negroes have not become fully integrated into the commercial life of the city and do not have a larger measure of economic control even within their own communities is due primarily to the fact that their normal participation in the economic life of Midwest metropolis is curtailed by traditional attitudes toward colored persons and by the vested economic interests of white occupational groups. These factors are reinforced by the subtle but nonetheless powerful tendencies toward dispersal of effort which result from the conditions of life in the black ghetto. What conditions? Poor housing, overcrowding, poverty, crime. All of these existed in the black ghetto and caused Negroes to disperse their efforts to address them, which meant that they couldn't focus solely on economic improvement. For Negro businesses to compete with white businesses in Negro communities, they must be able to meet the price and give equivalent service. Negro businessmen insist that they face 5 main competitive difficulties. 1. Difficulty in procuring capital and credit. 2. Difficulty in getting adequate training. 3. Inability to secure choice locations on the main business streets. 4. Lack of sufficient patronage to allow them to amass capital and to make improvements. 5. Inability to organize for cooperative effort. 5 major handicaps, don't you agree? These circumstances have resulted in a situation in which Negroes have found it extremely difficult to compete with white businessmen in the same field as to prices and service. This, in turn, tends to reinforce the stereotype that Negroes are not good businessmen. In order to meet the competition, Negro businessmen and community leaders stress the dogmas of racial solidarity in an effort to amass capital and patronage. Because this is at least one of those 5 difficulties that Negroes were primarily responsible for. It was under their control to make deliberate decisions to support Negro businesses if they wanted to. Many community leaders understood that. And I know they tried hard to make it a universal practice among Negroes. I know they tried hard. This results in a pattern of behavior in which both Negro customers and merchants are always on the defensive vis-a-vis one another and often take refuge in mutual derogation. Despite these difficulties, some Negroes have been able to compete with whites for the Negro market, and some have even been able to develop businesses competing in the general city market. There are always those who run through obstacles to get where they need to go, no matter what the circumstance is. And the Negroes who could compete, even when the odds were heavily stacked against them, are prime examples of these type of people. Now, in the next commentary, we're going to hear a little bit more about the Negro business to customer situation that is happening. And we're going to hear some more on what people had to say about that situation. So stay tuned. But for now, I want to thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael. And I'll see you in the free world.